Women aren't afraid to work. Women aren't afraid to get together. And we talk to each other. That's a good thing. We don't just say, how'd the Steelers do? How'd the Eagles do? But we talk seriously to each other. And if you want something done, go to one of the women. They'll make a list and they'll get together and they'll get it done.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the FarmHouse. I'm Candace Worsbowski.
And I'm Stephanie Spiker.
And we're recording this at the tail end of Pennsylvania Farm Show Week. Steph, how was your Farm Show Week?
Busy is pretty much the key word, but in a good way. It was very busy in a good way.
You practically lived there.
Yeah, I was there 3 days in a row for work here at Lancaster Farming, because outside of doing this podcast, if those of you don't know as much about Lancaster Farming, I am a reporter and I run all of our social media. So I was there 3 days in a row for various events, including the first ever mullet contest. Yes, mullets, the hairstyle, which was something.
The controversial hairstyle.
Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, no offense to mullet wearers out there, you do you, but it's not my favorite hairstyle, and I was like, I didn't know what to expect going into it, and it turned out to be kind of insane. There were over 90 people came out to enter the contest with their mullets, and in total, across all of our social medias of TikTok and Instagram, 5 million people viewed our video about the contest. 3 million on TikTok and 2 million on Instagram. As of today, when we're recording, who knows what it's going to be when people hear this. But yeah, it's a little wild, and yeah, it was a really fun, busy week. And this was a special farm show, I guess, for you a little bit, because it was
my first
ever farm show.
Baby's first farm show. Yeah, I grew up hearing about the farm show, and I always thought that unless you were a farmer or worked in agriculture, like, why would you go to the farm show? And then I started working for Lancaster Farming, and immediately I wanted to go to the farm show because you guys would all go for work, and you'd come back with these great stories, and I'd hear all about the food, and just, it sounded like a great time and a lot of stuff to see. And this year I was finally able to go up, and it absolutely exceeded my expectations. It was a little overwhelming at first, but it was great. I loved, seeing all the animals. I loved the food. I got a farm show milkshake, of course, and I also got some of the fried cheese cubes that have a really great cheesy stretch if you're into that sort of thing, which I am. And yeah, it was great. So I went up this year with you, Steph, because we were going to interview our guest this week, who is Mary Klaus. She is a journalist and a historian who specializes in documenting the history of the Pennsylvania Farm Show. She's written 2 books on the subject. One is Hold Your Horses, the Pennsylvania Farm Show at 100, which celebrates 100 years of the farm show. And the other one is Blue Ribbon Patriotism, how the Pennsylvania Farm Show helped the World War II effort, which discusses how the farm show changed during the World War II era. And aside from all that, Mary is just this amazing font of knowledge about the farm show. I feel like it might be a slight exaggeration, but maybe not much to say that she has probably seen and done everything there is to do at farm show. I mean, I joke that you lived at farm show this year, but I mean, Mary kind of almost does.
Yeah, I mean, she had told us, like, while we were heading up to find a quiet place to do an interview, because if any of you have been to farm show, you know there's a lot of people and not a lot of quiet places. But she was telling us as we were finding a place for the interview that there were times where she actually slept there because of snow or other issues. And I'm like, that kind of sounds fun, but also kind of sounds terrible. So yeah, she really has legitimately lived there before.
My initial thought was, oh, that'd be kind of fun, like sleeping over, all the animals and stuff. But then my immediate follow-up thought was, I really like having a shower in the morning, and I don't think that that's going to be happening at farm show.
They do have some showers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so one of our coworkers, Rebecca, was there with me the one day covering the livestock sale, and she joked about doing an in-depth piece of, like, sleeping at the farm show. And she mentioned to me, like, while she was running around getting her interviews done during the sale, that she happened to stumble upon where the showers are located. So if we take Rebecca, she can show us the way to the showers.
Great. So Let's dive in with Mary. She's got a lot of fun stories about the farm show over the years, and let's get to it.
All right. Well, Mary, welcome to our podcast, The FarmHouse. It is awesome to have you with us. We would love to just know a little more about you first. So if you can just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
My name's Mary Klaus. I have covered the farm show since the late 1970s as a reporter. I've worked most of my life as a reporter. I also work these days as a hospice nurse for Hospice Central Pennsylvania, and I go on medical mission trips. I've done 59 international medical trips.
We have a standard question that we like to ask everyone, and normally it's, how did you know you wanted to be involved in agriculture? And we did tweak it a little for you, and we made it, when did you know you wanted to start documenting agriculture?
I was a 4-H kid in Westmoreland County once upon a time, and when I came to Harrisburg, the farm show was a very big deal, and it still is. And I started writing about it pretty early in my career here, and I fell in love with it. So I knew from the beginning I wanted to do it. As I learned more and more about it, I realized what a wonderful, wonderful thing the Pennsylvania Farm Show is for our state, and I wanted to do more writing about it.
Oh, great. So in what ways over the years has the farm show changed to reflect, the times? And that might be in regards to agriculture, but it could also be in regard to outside of the agricultural sphere.
When we talk about the history, we will see how history itself has touched the farm show. But also, the Pennsylvania Farm Show is influenced by the world. So in its earlier years, it was more of a farmer show, and when I started covering it, there was a lot more machinery and a lot more farmers here. As time went on, the emphasis of the farm show kind of switched to consumers, and now we have things that, while they are very cool, might not have to do with agriculture, but they're great crowd pleasers. Just 2 days ago, we had the Pennsylvania Perfect Mullet Contest, and hundreds and hundreds of people watched that. But we also are true to the roots, so we have the horse pulls, the square dancing, the judging of animals, the judging of everything from canned green beans to pumpkins and apples, and we learn a lot about the different industries too, but I've seen more of an emphasis on consumers and teaching.
What are some of the biggest changes you've noticed within the ag industry specifically?
There's a lot less farmers than there used to be, and there's a lot more electronics in farming. People don't do, unless they're Amish, the horse-drawn farming, and even the combines and a lot of the different equipment are computerized and air-conditioned, and people didn't used to have that.
What about today's farm show do you think would surprise organizers or attendees from the first few farm shows?
The very first day of the first farm show was January 17th, 1923, and that farm show was held in a building in Harrisburg where they sold farm equipment and implements, and it was showing seeds and new implements, and it was a trade show. They did have some apples to look at and some other exhibits like that. No animals, no food. If they would jump into the Pennsylvania's 108th Farm Show, their eyes would pop at the size of the crowds, at the size of at the fact that there is a farm show complex and the size of it, at all the different food available, but mostly at the amazing variety of exhibits, some of which, as we said, are not directly involved with agriculture, but are fun and bring people out. So I think that would surprise people. The other thing would be how people dress for the farm show, because in the old days, the people would be all dressed up. The ladies wore dresses and long coats and heels and hats, and the men wore suits. And people dress a lot more casually these days.
Well, I'm glad you brought up what the ladies were wearing, because this is a podcast that focuses on women in ag, and we were wondering, what historically has been the role of women in events like the Pennsylvania Farm Show, and how has that changed over time?
In the early years, women were simply support for the men. It was all about the guys. And the women would come along and help them, and they might show some things in sewing or quilting, but it was very ladylike. Things changed a whole lot, not just at the farm show, but in our nation when World War II came. And when we talk about history, this complex was used as a World War II factory for a few years, and I can tell you about that. Now, fast forward, and you have women in charge of a lot of things. Yesterday, at the Sale of Champions, there were 5 species of animals shown by junior champions. All 5 were girls, not guys. That never happened before. The head of the farm show complex, Sharon Myers, that's a woman. And the assistant is a woman. And women are taking a much stronger leadership role, and in some cases there's more women than men. So I have applauded that.
Yeah, it's a very exciting change that we're happy to see.
I'm glad you mentioned women within like 4-H and the FFA, and how, especially at the Sale of Champions this year, they kind of, kicked butt. And I feel like when you look at FFA and 4-H, especially now, a lot of the leadership roles tends to be women instead of men. Like we do have, one gentleman who's a FFA state officer, and I believe there's also a gentleman who's a 4-H, or maybe two. I don't really remember, but you do get young men as well. But, why do you think women tend to be in those leadership roles in those organizations? And, do you think that has a potential impact on the future of agriculture?
Women aren't afraid to work. Women aren't afraid to get together. And we talk to each other. That's a good thing. We don't just say, how'd the Steelers do? How'd the Eagles do? But we talk seriously to each other. And if you want something done, go to one of the women. They'll make a list and they'll get together and they'll get it done.
Yeah. And then, I feel like since you're here pretty much every single day of the farm show and you're here every single year, you get to, really see and interact with the FFA and 4-H members who are pretty much, youth or very young adults. And, how have you seen those programs evolve over the years? And I've always said the kids in FFA and 4-H give me hope for the future. So how has your involvement been with watching those programs here at the farm show?
Ever since I started covering the farm show, I like to interview the children, the younger people. And of course, nowadays you ask their mother or dad if it's okay, and then you have them step aside. They can listen, but don't jump in and answer every question. And I find that if I treat them like adults and I ask a serious question, even 6-year-olds come up with wonderful answers. And their mothers and dads' mouth drop as they hear their kids talk. I watch the kids become more, I don't want to know if it's sophisticated, but they're not afraid to tell it like it is. I think the kids at the FFA and the 4-H are well behaved. I don't see behavior problems here at all, and I wish all the Pennsylvania kids could emulate the FFA and 4-H kids.
Yeah, we get to meet the state officers all the time, and then we get involved with meeting and interviewing and talking to different FFA and 4-H kids around throughout the year, and I agree. I think they're all a very good group of kids.
Yeah, they're a very nice bunch. So kind of pivoting back to women and their contributions, I'm sure you're aware throughout history, women, what they've been doing have been kind of tragically underrepresented or completely omitted in some cases from history, or at least the documentation of history. As a journalist and a historian, is that something you're keeping in mind when you're writing or documenting? And if so, how are you addressing that as you're, chronicling the farm show?
That especially came true last year with my following the women. So a couple years ago, I guess it was at the 2021 show, Jason Morgenstern, the engineering director, said, come to my office. I have something fabulous to show you. I had been here 13 or 14 hours, and I said, can I see it tomorrow? He said, no, come now. So I did. So I trudged up to his office, and I was just looking at it to make him happy, so I thought. And when I got there, he had this photo album of about 100 black and white glossy pictures. Somebody's mother had died. They found it in the closet, and it was pictures of the farm show complex in the early 1940s. What most people don't know, and I discovered was the best kept secret, and I determined to write a book about it and did, was that when 1941 farm show was being planned in early December, everything was looking good. December 7th, Pearl Harbor happened, and suddenly we were at war. The farm show folks talked about canceling the farm show, but we were so close to it, 63 days out from the Pearl Harbor attacks, that we went ahead and had the farm show. And I say we, I wasn't around back then, but I feel like I was because I researched it so much. So after that farm show, people were all talking about the war. We were in the war. And the War Department came to the farm show and said, we need to use your building. And for 2 years, this complex was the Pennsylvania State School of Aeronautics, where they taught civilians how to fix airplane engines. And next 2 years, the farm show complex was a war factory. Most of the people, a good many of those 4,000 people that worked here over the time, were women, because they called them Rosie the Riveter, because the men were off at war. So you had women, and this is what I wrote about in my book, Blue Ribbon Patriotism, how the Pennsylvania Farm Show helped the World War II effort. You had women working here and doing all kind of things that were, quote, unladylike. Suddenly, women were very much in the foreground at the farm show and at the war effort. So women carried a lot of the load, and men, there were men back here too. So what I did was I said I would research this. But the trail was 80 years old. And I found a woman from the Altoona area who had been one of these women. She was 99 years old, and I interviewed her. And then I found a woman, well, she had died in 2005, but did an oral interview, and Esther Tritt was her name, and she was a high school girl in Carlisle. She was sitting in class, got tapped on the shoulder, and you need to go to the principal's office. Well, why? She said. You know how it is when you get called the principal's office, or maybe you two don't. I don't either. But anyway, she was called to the principal's office, and he picked 6 people, not just women, 6 people to go to help the Army Air Corps, that it wasn't an Air Force then, it was an Air Corps, to fix airplane engines. She says, I'm not a mechanic. So she goes home and tells her parents, and her parents said, oh, no, our daughter's not going to do that. And she was a member of the Church of the Brethren. They said, oh, no, none of our people do anything military. Esther was a free spirit and thought about it and went. She went to the school for 2 years and then became an airplane mechanic and actually worked on airplanes. And then some people worked here in the airplanes, a lot of them, but there was also at Middletown at the Olmsted Air Base, which is now where the Harrisburg International Airport is. So Esther had died. I got to listen to her recording, and because of that, I took all kind of notes, and then I tracked down her 3 children. And this whole book, I spent a year tracking down an 80-year-old trail, and I was able to find things and people. But this book about how the Blue Ribbon Patriotism book is full of pictures from those days.
Oh, there she is. Yeah.
I have pictures of these people, of their families, and some of the regular life. Women had to do a lot of things. Women couldn't wear stockings in World War II because the silk was needed for parachutes. But being resourceful kind of folks, they just painted their legs with a dye, took a mascara pencil, and drew a line down the back of their leg. And if you didn't take a shower for 3 days, it lasted, they tell me. Then the War Department said, ladies, don't wear your girdles. We need the rubber for tires. So instead of wearing girdles, they told them to exercise. Women had to start being creative because now there were ration coupons. You could have all kind of money, but if you didn't have the coupon to go with it to say you could buy something, you couldn't buy it. So they learned how to make cakes without eggs, cakes without butter. They learned how to plant gardens. They called them victory gardens, and they learned how to can again. So women carried the load here as well as for the military. And the Farm Show Complex is a fine example where the women worked.
Wow, the story of Esther, that's amazing. I mean, we were just talking about well-behaved kids, right? And I feel like today, if you talk about someone rebelling against their parents, rebelling against their church, you would not think of a young woman going to serve the armed forces. So it's interesting to me how it completely turns around. And I know she wasn't an active serviceman, but like the fact that she went to go support the armed forces, that's very different than I think you would see today when you picture a teenager rebelling.
The whole history of how the farm show impacted World War II, it was regular people at a regular time, and our country was so very united from what I could tell back then. I mean, Middletown, right near here, they had air raid practices because they were afraid, because they housed the place where the airplane engines were fixed and sent back to war, that the enemy would come and bomb them. They had in a cow pasture a little place where people would sit with binoculars, civilians, and watch the skies. They had to have blackout drills. And you don't think Middletown as being anything scary, but Middletown was a huge, important part of it all.
Yeah, that's honestly fascinating. I mean, I had heard a little bit about, the history of the complex with World War II. I believe when your book was being released, I think I had read up on it a little bit, and it is just fascinating stuff. And, why, when you come to the farm show, even though it has evolved a lot over the years, its main essence and goal is still to showcase agriculture. And why do you think it's important to have large events like this to showcase ag? And then for you personally, why is that so important to also document?
Many years ago, back when the farm show started, we were an agriculture society. Now, a small percent of people are agriculture. People are so far removed that they think milk comes from the store. They don't know how things are grown. They don't know how things work with animals. Just an hour ago, I was reading my children's book at a children's reading, and the children knew that milk came from a cow, but they didn't know a lot else about it. So you have to start teaching people about it because there's not the farm to go to anymore. for me personally, I think it's so important to document it so we hold on to this history. This 80-year-old trail of World War II, I wish so much I had known about all this 20, 30 years ago. I could have talked to the real people. But I was able to document it through all kind of historic societies and sitting on floors in dusty attics at historic societies even, going through their boxes and finding things. And you got to capture that while you can.
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like a lot of people think, oh, I should have asked these questions to, people once it's too late. And so definitely you need to ask the questions while you have the chance.
Right, exactly. All right, so turning back to the farm show, why should people outside of the farming community visit the Pennsylvania Farm Show or similar agriculture events? I know you mentioned that a lot of people are just out of touch with what's going on in agriculture. Is there any reason beyond that?
That's the main reason, but it's so much fun. I mean, from morning to night, for 8 days, you come here, you get educated, you get fed, you get exercise, you meet people. Pennsylvania Farm Show is where we come together. The food court is our dining room, and we all come together to eat. The arenas, especially the New Holland Arena, that's where we come and dreams happen in that arena. People have victories, sometimes defeats. People have fabulous entertainment there. Oh my goodness. The rodeos on Saturday and even the paid rodeos in the evenings. How often do people in everyday life get to see a real rodeo in person? That is fabulously cool. We've had events come and go over the years. We've had goat racing here, which has been fun. We've had ice cream churning contests. Some of these aren't held anymore, but which have been fun. As I said, this week we had a mullet contest. So we do fun things to come together, and that unites us as a people. I think that's so good.
Steph, would you like to comment on the mullet contest since you were there?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm so sorry to any of our listeners who love them. I am not a huge fan of the mullet. It's not my favorite do. But so I was a little, I was a little unsure as I was going to the event, being like, oh my gosh, this is going to be weird and just, I don't know about this. And so, I went there obviously to cover it for the paper and for social media. And I get there and it just was a blast. Everyone had so much fun. There were so many people in the audience and everyone was cheering and screaming and clapping and all the contestants were dancing around on stage. And I was like, you know what? It's still not my favorite haircut, but I was like, that was genuinely a very fun time. I had so much fun. And so you were there as well?
I was. I didn't think it was going to be a cool event either. And I love to see enthusiasm and spirit. And you saw it there and that made it worthwhile. I hope it's in an arena next year, though. We needed a bigger venue.
Yeah, with over 90 contestants and hundreds of people coming to watch. Yeah, I think next year it might warrant a bigger space here in the complex.
I feel like next year it might warrant live coverage on TV or something. Okay, so your book is filled with some fun, as you said, some quirky farm show stories from over the years. Could you share some of your favorites?
Well, in 1960, Governor Lawrence, like many governors at farm shows, was doing the tour. And in those days, the governor was supposed to pretend he was a farmer, and only one or two of our governors ever have been, and milk a cow. So Governor Lawrence sat down on the milking stool to try to milk a cow. And the lady that helped him, they called them milkmaids, M-A-I-D, not princesses. She was standing right nearby. As he went to get up, the stool was small, Governor Lawrence was not. And he fell onto the floor and sprawled in a rather undignified manner. The photographers had a field day taking pictures of him. The dairy milkmaid was trying to help him up, but he was a lot bigger than she was. And he eventually got up, and it made the New York Times. So the next year when he was invited, he wrote a letter saying, do not expect another milk stool performance, because he wasn't going to do one. And the butter sculpture. So the butter sculpture started in 1990, and I remember it was a 600 pounds of Ben Franklin, one big Ben Franklin. Of course, he's very prominent for our state. And Governor Robert Casey, who was very dignified and didn't show a lot of emotion, was standing there, and I was right beside him when they unveiled it. And he said, that's incredible. Okay, so all these years later, we have the butter sculpture today, and people are still saying that's incredible. Now, one year, the butter sculpture was I like to say in my book, he had a sex change operation, but it's not as naughty as it sounds. So what happened was The butter sculpture was a woman in a cafeteria handing out milk cartons to a little boy and a little girl. Well, the butter sculpture case, a 7-sided refrigerated case, is always kept kind of undercover, like with drapes around it so nobody sees it before the unveiling. The night before the unveiling, a farm show worker on a forklift accidentally hit the case, but didn't realize that anything happened. The next morning, the sculptor comes to, get ready, and he looks in, and he's horrified to see that the lady had fallen when this impact happened of the forklift onto the little girl, and they were both a mess. Now, butter comes in 55-pound blocks from Land O'Lakes. It's a donation, and it's frozen and it has to be at a certain temperature, and he didn't have time to redo it. Plus, he had an unveiling in a couple hours. So, he, being resourceful, he thought quickly. He said, okay. He got the lady up, and he got her fixed. The little girl was somewhat of a buttery mess. So he said, well, I don't have more butter, but I take this off and trimmed her hair and made it a little boy, made the skirt into pants, and it was a little boy. Now, I hadn't seen, and I was under strict secrecy, never told anybody what it was. So the next day at the unveiling, I'm there with my notebook and pen, and I said, wait a minute, that was a little girl yesterday, now it's a little boy, what happened? So I pulled the sculptor aside after the unveiling and the press conference and all and said, okay, we got to talk. And he tells me what happened. I was sworn to secrecy, which I kept until I wrote this book of the centennial. And that's how the butter sculpture had a sex change operation, but no one knew about it.
Any others that you would like to share?
So in the poultry area, which sadly we don't have this year due to the ban because of avian influenza, one year I was doing a story, and there was this little boy who had 15 chickens entered. His favorite was a black one named Elvis, and he loved Elvis, and Elvis got a blue ribbon. So on the last day of the farm show, I interview people as they're packing, and I go into the poultry room, and I see this little boy crying, and he seems very sad. And I go over and I said, honey, what's wrong? Elvis is gone, he said. I said, well, I thought, yeah, he's been gone. So I said, I said, Elvis. He said, my chicken. And he's telling me about the chicken Elvis. So I wrote a story entitled it, Elvis Has Left the Building. So a couple days later, I get a call from a bar in Harrisburg saying, don't think we're crazy, but we have Elvis. I said, really? And they tell me this black chicken. They said, what should we do with it? So I said, get a cardboard box with a lid, punch holes in the lid, put paper in it, put the chicken in the box, and take it to the farm show main entrance at security and tell them Mary Klaus sent you. So he did what I said, and I called security and said, can you just watch this box and I'll have the family come and get it? The family was from, I think, Clarion County. So the family, this in mid-January, the family drives all the way to Harrisburg to get Elvis, only to find out that chicken was not Elvis. So
It was an impersonator.
it was an impersonator, and Elvis still had left the building. So the security said, we don't want this chicken, Mary, it's yours. Well, all of a sudden, I had this chicken to deal with, so I called across the street to the ag department and got someone to take the chicken. So I thought the chicken story was over until another week goes by, and I get a call from somebody in Perry County and said, we think we have Elvis. Well, by this time, I wasn't going to accept any strange chickens, so I had the Perry County people contact the Clarion County people, and that wasn't Elvis either. Elvis had left the building for good.
And he remains on the lam. Well, probably not to this day, but
He was on the lam.
yeah.
Well, so honestly, this has been such a fun interview. I've loved to hear all the stories, both the more serious ones and all the little quirky ones as well. But we always end all of our podcasts with the same questions for everyone. So we'll ask you that question now, and it's a bit of a big one, but answer it in any way you want to. What does being a woman in ag mean to you?
Being a woman in ag means being smart, with a big heart and hardworking spirit. And I think that the women in agriculture today have all that. There's more women-owned farms, there's more women in business, there's more women in charge, and they're getting things done. And it's funny, when I wrote the book, Blue Ribbon Patriotism, one of my favorite quotes was something that President Roosevelt used to say. He used to say, when you come to the end of your rope, tie a knot and hold on. Women have that resiliency that no matter how bad things are, they manage to hold on, and these women in agriculture today are doing that and succeeding where you wouldn't think they would. So hats off to the women in agriculture in Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you so much, Mary, for joining us here at the farmhouse for our first ever on-site interview We actually interviewed Mary here at the Farm Show Complex for all of our listeners out there. So thank you so much for joining us. It was great to have you.
I had fun too, and you enjoy the rest of the farm show. There's lots going on yet.
All right, our very first on-site interview. We got through it. We hopefully didn't have too much background noise, so I think everything went pretty well. And my gosh, Mary was so much fun to talk to. She has a million farm show stories. I'm sure she hardly scratched the surface when she was talking with us.
There were some things she was alluding to that we didn't really get to when we turned the mics on, but she was talking about like selling coffins and I think some like dentistry that was going on. I think we're going to have her back at some point to tell us more stories because there's so many. We could have talked to her for hours.
I think my favorite story she told us was of Governor Lawrence falling off the stool while trying to milk a cow because, I mean, that would just be humiliating. I feel like
even if you weren't the governor.
Right. And like the fact that she showed us photos in her book of him falling and
it was very undignified.
Poor guy. But I will say Pennsylvania's current governor, Governor Shapiro, was at the farm show this year and, our one coworker, Tom Vineski, was with him for the tour, and he sent me a lovely picture of Governor Shapiro feeding a little calf, and I want to just let everyone know that he stayed upright, he was standing, he was good.
Wonderful.
That photo is on our Instagram if anyone wants to see it. The calf's adorable, and yeah, he did not fall over, so kudos to you, Shapiro, you did it.
Making the wise choice of avoiding the milking stool. I loved her stories about what was going on during World War II, especially what the women were dealing with on the home front, and just the ways their creativity wound up influencing, I mean, really our world today when she talks about, like, you know, they started to have to exercise more. They wanted trimmer waists and they weren't able to use girdles anymore. I also loved the idea of just painting your legs and painting a stripe up the back of your leg so that you can get that nice like stocking effect. I don't know, Steph, are we ready to like bring this trend back? If I come in next week to work with a stripe just painted up my leg, will you look twice?
I would not judge you. More power to you. I don't know if I would take the time and effort to paint my legs. I mean, I feel like you've got to really fully commit if you're going for it. And you know what? When I get up in the morning and come to the office, it is I leave a very small amount of time for the actual process of choosing outfits and getting dressed. So I don't think I'd have time to paint my legs.
Yeah, I can't really draw a straight line to save my life, so that's also going to be a challenge, I think. Okay.
Well, that wraps up the podcast this week. Thank you guys for listening. It was a lot of fun doing our first ever on-site interview at the farm show.
Yep.
And we will chat with you guys next week. If you want to reach out to us, email podcast@lancasterfarming.com.
And otherwise, we will see you back next time.
Yeah. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Candace.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
This episode of FarmHouse is copyright 2024 by Lancaster Farming newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. It was written by myself, Stephanie Spiker, and Candace Wierkowski, and was produced by Eric Hurlow. The music you hear is by Tim Bird Shadow.